Hello, everybody. Welcome to Cine Mancuso, and this is Notes on the News. I'm Peter Mancuso, and this is the show where I break down the biggest stories in film, media, and entertainment, and give you my thoughts. If you're joining us live, thank you. Super happy to have you. At any point during the show, if you have a specific question about the topic I'm covering, feel free to drop that in the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on it best I can. If you're watching after the fact, still happy to have you. At some point, you should be able to find the chapter descriptions in the description for different time codes to kind of jump around the video. And if you haven't already, definitely subscribe. It would really be a huge help for the show. So why don't we jump in to the first topic? We're going to talk about the box office. Okay, so this past weekend, total, we got about $38 million domestically in the United States. And this is about a 37% drop from last weekend, which last weekend, if you remember, was not very good either. So this is pretty pathetic. Again, January and February are always kind of slow, but as we're starting to move into mid-February, things should start picking up, and these numbers are a little concerning. So the only thing major film this week releasing, or opening, I should say, is we got Lisa Frankenstein coming in at number 2, grossing about $3.8 million domestically. So this wasn't projected to do very well to begin with. It was projected to make around 7 to 12 million in its opening weekend, and only was able to bring in about half that. So, I really haven't seen any marketing for this movie, and I go to the movies pretty frequently, and I've not seen a trailer for this. So, I'm planning on going to see it later this week, but yeah, these numbers just aren't great. It was a pretty cheap movie though. It was only made for about 13 million. So, I think they, with a movie like this, it's horror-based, kind of, but like a horror comedy. It's also kind of like a rom-com. So I guess they really, they basically had the choice of, do we want to do it in October with more horror fare or kind of lean into the romantic side? And, they've leaned into the romantic side, but it hasn't really worked out for them. So maybe they'll get a little bit of a bump this week with Valentine's Day on Wednesday. But that day itself already has its own set of new releases, so I'm not sure how much room there's going to be for something like this, which again isn't really on people's radar. In terms of the rest of the top 10, in terms of things that are continuing, we got 2 projects here that are in their second week. Argyle coming in at number 1 again, being able to hold the spot. So that's another kind of issue with Lisa Frankenstein, is that it couldn't even claim the very top of the box office. Argyle was able to hold on to that, 6.5 million for the weekend. Huge drop, 63% drop. Again, the word of mouth, I think, it kind of opposite of Lisa Frankenstein. It was everywhere. Social media, commercials, the trailer, which again has infamously been, mocked and finding out who's the real Agent Argyle. And then, just poor word of mouth and bad reviews has seemed to really hurt this. So it's so far total, it's made about 29 million domestic, 60 million worldwide. And again, this is on a reported budget of about 200 to 250 million dollars. So it's not looking like it's even gonna make back that budget, let alone making any kind of profit. And again, another indictment of just the status of the American box office at this point in 2024. Again, we have The Chosen, Season 4, Episodes 1 and 3 that were released as kind of like a big batch. I think it's with Fathom Events. That was at second place last week, and it managed to stay in the top 5, only dropping to number 4. It had about a 47% drop, which, I think considering that this is essentially just the first 3 episodes of a TV show season, I think this is perfectly fine numbers. If anything, this is more about building awareness for the property and less about actual box office intake. It had about a 47% drop. And again, I'm surprised it even is going into a second weekend. I feel like this would have been better as a 1 week only kind of situation. But so far it's made about 13 million domestic and worldwide. And again, since it is a television show first and foremost, this is any money that they're making here is really just icing on the cake, at least in my opinion. Not much else to report here. Again, it's kind of just same old, same old. Again, Beekeeper holding third place in its 5th frame, only dropping about 34%, making about 55 million domestic so far and 134 million worldwide off of just a $34 million budget. So this film has ended up being very successful. I'm not sure how or why, but clearly it has enough of an audience of people wanting to see a bombastic Jason Statham action thriller kind of thing that it's ended up doing fairly well for them. Again, Wonka is still in the top 5 in its 9th frame. It only dropped from 4th to 5th place. Only a 33% drop, and so far it's made about $205 million just domestically, and close to $600 million worldwide. All just on a $125 million budget. So this has been a rousing success. A rousing success. And yeah, I think just looking at all of it, if you take a look at the kind of the right side of these columns here, we have like the amount of weeks that they've been in theaters. And if you notice, a majority of these premiered in 2023, right? So a lot, so this box office weekend, as well as just the entire 2024, has been pretty abysmal. And even within those abysmal results, it's been primarily dominated by projects that came out the year prior in November or December. So, you know, I think you have these films like American Fiction and Poor Things, again, who got a little bit of a bump once they got their nominations. But, you know, not hugely successful. Again, American Fiction and Poor Things only grossing about $1 million or so this past weekend. Poor Things doing a little bit better totally. It has about $81 million worldwide, just off of a $35 million budget. So yeah, again, things just aren't looking great, and I think Hollywood's really looking towards, you know, I think this upcoming Valentine's Day is going to be potentially a decent box office draw, but I think it's really looking to Dune Part 2 in early March to really hopefully kind of inject some life into this box office. Okay, so just one quick thing. I want to just give a shout out to myself. Doing, you know, Cinema and Cuso is not just a YouTube channel, but is also originally started as a Substack newsletter where I could publish different reviews for newer releases coming out. And I just want to kind of plug a current review that I just released this past week for a Danish film called The Promised Land, starring Mads Mikkelsen, which you can see up there. Really, really strong film. You know, kind of simple, but just a really interesting interpersonal drama set in the 18th century, which, you know, if you're not into history or something like that, that sounds really boring, but it's a really engaging story and has some really interesting character stuff there. So highly recommend you go see it and check out my review at cinemancuso.substack.com. All right, so let's talk about story number 1 here. So this is like a really big story. And part of me, like in a lot of ways, this should have been like 3 or 4 different stories. But I feel like they really are part of one larger story. So, and hopefully that's kind of evident by once I kind of get to the end of all this. So Disney, this past week has really given an outline, you know, for their strategies for the future. So in terms of like the context of these announcements, which I'll get to in a moment, Disney has, you know, been struggling obviously for the past few years, but especially this past year. 2023 was probably one of their worst years in recent memory. I think it was like the first year in a long time that it didn't have even just $1 billion with a B, $billion movie. And it's been fielding kind of threats from activist investors. So if you're not well versed in this, essentially an activist investor is an investor who tries to acquire a large stake in a company with the intention of really trying to influence the corporate decision making and the direction of the company, right? As opposed to like if I you know, buy some stock of Disney on Robinhood, obviously, you know, like I still have some voting power, but not really enough to really make any major difference as an individual. And Disney currently has 2 potential, you know, kind of activist investor war fronts, so to speak. So you know, leading up to their shareholder meeting in April, and they're going to have their election for different, you know, directors for the board of directors. There's essentially 3 different slates of potential nominees. So you have the ones that Disney is you know, kind of sponsoring and pushing for. And then you have nominees from Nelson Peltz and his company Trian Partners. And Nelson Peltz currently, controls about $3 billion worth of shares. Peltz, again, is an activist investor. He's tried to get on the board of Disney like 24 times in the past 18 months, and is really trying to transform Disney. Has really not been, this proxy fight really started even before Bob Iger came back and replaced his own successor, Bob Chapek. But again, he has not let up since Iger has come back. He is trying everything he can to kind of transform the direction of the company, even trying to get like Elon Musk on his side, who, as we know, Elon Musk has had some pretty choice words for Disney in terms of advertising on Twitter, or now known as X. And it seems like Peltz, he's identified, according to, Variety notes that Peltz has identified 5 key areas of reform: corporate governance, streaming profitability, creative output, growth in parks, and the future of ESPN. And those are kind of his focal areas of that's where he wants to see the most change, right? So that's Nelson Peltz, right? But then you also have a third-party group, Blackwell's Capital. They have a much smaller share in the company, about 15 million worth of shares are in their control. And they generally support Iger and his leadership, but they still have 3 different nominees that they want to get elected. And a big thing that Blackwell's Capital has been trying to push is that they believe that Disney should be broken up, just broken up into different ventures, especially its like real estate holdings. So here's a quote. That Variety provided from Blackwell's Capital. Quote: "Disney may simply be too complex for any one successor to Mr. Iger to manage holistically, and Blackwell's believes that it is the responsibility of the board to oversee these types of analyses in the ordinary course." End quote. And again, like I mentioned, in the wrap also notes, one area of this is considerable real estate holdings. Disney, there's a lot of truth to this quote, because Disney has become very unwieldy. The company grew so much under Bob Iger's tenure, because in that, period of that first Bob Iger run, so to speak, they acquire Pixar, Marvel, Lucasfilm, Fox, and not to mention just expanding their pre-existing, ventures. So I really don't think it's any mistake that Bob Chapek, who succeeded Bob Iger, failed. That's honestly, in retrospect, and even at the time, it really wasn't that surprising, because, for better or for worse, Bob Iger created this monster, and he needs to kind of tame it in a sense. Blackwell's Capital also thinks Peltz is a distraction. And Disney agrees, right? They say, quote, "Mr. Peltz has not offered a single strategic idea that would benefit shareholders," end quote. So he mentions all these 5 different things that he wants changed, but doesn't really provide any, solutions. So why are these companies doing this? Are they really gonna be able to do like a hostile takeover of Disney? Not really, but the goal is ultimately to move the stock price, right? When the term activist investor almost sounds like an activist, like social justice, and in this it really is about the bottom line, like really feeling like this is a firm that could really be making way more money than it currently is. So and to be fair, the fact that this is it at least puts pressure on Disney. Bob Iger has to kind of respond in some way, right? And due to certain announcements or decisions, the stock has gone up about 7% since the start of the year. So all of this being said, right? All of this being said, Disney had its quarterly earnings report earlier last week, or in the middle of last week, and it outlined its metrics in terms of success. What it's been able to achieve this quarter in terms of subscriber growth and things like that, as well as offering, some specific announcements and strategies that should get shareholders excited. So in terms of their quarterly earnings, Disney Plus lost about 1.3 million subscribers in the final quarter of 2023. This was amid a pretty hefty price hike, so it's not surprising that some people have jumped ship, right? But the success here, at least the way Disney is spinning it, is that it narrowed its streaming losses by $300 million. So that's like the metric of success now in the streaming business, is like, yes, we're all going to lose money, but how much money are we going to lose, right? It also, looking ahead, Disney projects of adding up to about 6 million new core subscribers to Disney Plus. And it also, this past quarter, Disney Plus Hotstar, which is like their India branch of their streaming business, added about 700,000 subscribers. Hulu, which of course Disney owns, or at least at this point has a controlling stake, and I think they're trying to get it all now from Comcast, but Hulu also added about 1.2 million subscribers. So there are some, there is some good news here for Disney, right? And they project that they're on track to reach streaming profitability by the end of the fiscal year. So, that remains to be seen. We still need to see, right? But I think the most interesting part of this are all these announcements that they've made. And that's why I'm including them all in one story. It very much feels like, I feel like you cannot just look at these announcements without looking at that context of the context of all these different proxy fights brewing, right? There's a lot of pressure on Disney and Iger specifically to really turn the company around and making bold moves. So here's a couple of things that they've, have announced. The first thing is pretty minor, really cracking down on password sharing. This has been in the works for a while. This isn't new necessarily, but they really kind of reaffirmed that. They've already started doing this with Hulu, and it's already in effect for new subscribers. So if you were to subscribe to Disney Plus today, these new rules would be in place. But people like me who, have been there from the very beginning, the total crackdown is going to start around March 14th and go into the summer. And I felt for a long time that this password, I didn't feel like this is what was going to save streaming. As when Netflix really started to tumble, I think it was about a year or 2 years ago. That was one of the big things Netflix said, is that they were finally, we've been circling it for years. We're finally going to crack down on people sharing their passwords. We're going to convert these, accounts that are servicing 12 people, and we're going to try to make those into 4 or 5 individual accounts. And that's going to help the bottom line. And I was very skeptical, but it's been really successful for Netflix, at least in terms of the stock price, right? So, let's see if this works. But again, I don't think this is I think this is a Band-Aid to a much larger problem. Okay, so another thing that they've announced, and this is not exclusive to Disney necessarily, but you may have heard that Disney is teaming up with Fox Corp and Warner Brothers Discovery to launch a joint sports streaming venture. Okay, so this would include ESPN, TNT, and Fox Sports, along with many other spin-offs related to those three kind of brands, right? This is slated for the fall, just in time for football season, though notably it will not feature Sunday night football or Sunday afternoon football, and that's NBC and CBS, which are not part of this deal. And the idea is to kind of have this one-stop shop for at least those three company sports assets. In terms of pricing, the goal seems to be it would be more expensive than a standalone regional sports network, which is about $20 to $30 a month. But less than a larger digital programming package like YouTube TV, which is closer to $75 or $80 a month. So I would guess maybe somewhere in the 40 to 50 range. But that still remains to be seen. And Variety notes that this is an attempt by the industry and these companies to gain back some of those lucrative affiliate deals that have been lost due to cord cutting, right? Frankly, this is something that they should have done years ago. And it's surprising that it's just now, it's finally taking, these companies to just hit a brick wall when it comes to trying to make streaming happen. It's not good. Me girls, stop trying to make streaming happen. It's not going to happen. I'm surprised that it's taken this long. Each of these three companies would own a third. It won't share the profits equally, as the wrap notes, but this is very much a joint venture. It's very similar to the original creation of Hulu, if you remember, where Hulu was kind of created by a handful of entertainment companies as a way to get their content on linear TV out to more people. But again, this is hugely significant. This is a huge deal, right? Sports is really one of the few reasons people still have cable or have cable packages, right? And people like my parents, again, we still, forget the password share. We share accounts and stuff, but they still have cable. And I feel like sports is one of the huge thing that still kind of keeps people, tied to that kind of ecosystem. And again, between Disney and Fox Corp and Warner Brothers Discovery, this would constitute about 85% of the U.S. sports rights market, according to Variety. There's no Sunday night or Sunday afternoon football because I think just they were concerned about if you bring in too many services, it would just get too expensive and unwieldy. And something else interesting here is that this isn't just the games. It's technically the feeds of those linear programs as well. So potentially is also going to show non-sports stuff. Like if you went on the app, you could, if Family Guy is on Fox, you could watch Family Guy on this app. So I'm not sure how that would work, and that kind of makes things a little less clean. But I don't know. We'll see. But notably, this is not like they're gonna suddenly get rid of ESPN as a channel, or ESPN. There's been talks about ESPN having its own standalone app. Those are not evaporating into nothing, right? They're still gonna pursue these other individual avenues. But this is really important again, this is huge for those older audiences who just want the convenience of cable. You know what I mean? Like there was something elegant just about you get this cable and here's all these channels. And that's it, right? Whereas now you have all the different apps, you got to sign in different usernames and passwords and all this stuff. So we actually have a quote here that I found in Washington Post. Pat Crakes, who's a former Fox Sports executive, said, quote, "This had to happen because bundling is part of the future, even if it can't look like the old bundle," end quote. And I think Pat Crakes there is really spot on. That ultimately there was some, the industry needed to be disrupted, but the not all the disruptions were necessarily good. That you need to kind of break the system and then kind of put the pieces back together, potentially in certain ways where it resembles the old way. Take what worked in those disruptions, but maybe return to something with the stability of like the cable package or the bundle, right? Okay, so that's one announcement. See, that's only just one announcement. Another announcement that Disney made is that they are releasing Moana 2, which comes as no surprise. But the surprise here is that it's coming out this year, in November 27th, for the Thanksgiving release, which Disney has had a lock on for ages now. But I would be concerned if I was them because I feel like I think their last two Thanksgiving releases have kind of been bombs. With I think Strange World and then Wish this past year. So this is kind of interesting here. So this sequel was originally developed as a TV series, I believe for Disney Plus. But according to Variety, Iger was impressed by the footage so much that they decided to retool it into a feature film. Notably, this will not feature any music by Lin-Manuel Miranda, since I don't believe he was involved with this show that is now becoming a movie. And that decision feels like a huge misstep, right? Because I feel like the Moana the film is, in my opinion, fine, right? It's a perfectly fine animated movie, but I don't think that would have had the cultural staying power that it has had in the, I guess now, 8 years later, almost 7 or 8 years later, without the music. I think the music is the glue that holds that movie together. And that kind of ties into another point I have here is that the move to do this at all feels really desperate. Not to have a Moana sequel, but taking this, what was meant to be a Disney Plus show, and kind of cutting it down and transforming it into a theatrical film. And again, it makes sense they would want to continue this brand. The original Moana made almost $700 million worldwide. And according to IndieWire, it was the most streamed film of 2023. Again, I think kids who some of them weren't even alive when Moana first came out. But again, that music, I think it really is the music. I think if you cut out all the songs, I don't think kids would give two shits about this movie. But I think this move shows that they're really trying to move away. Like, the big kind of allure of Disney Plus, in some ways, and this has been a thing since streaming really started to get in on the original content bandwagon with Netflix and stuff. But it felt like Disney was really putting especially with their Marvel stuff, and they had a Monsters Inc. / University kind of spinoff. The idea being that these Disney Plus shows would be of film quality, right? That they didn't just feel like the red-haired stepchild of Disney. These were AAA quality, right? And this move to me shows that it's like, why are we going to waste all these resources on this Disney Plus show? Streaming is not what we had hoped it would be. We need to get back into that lucrative theatrical business that, it's like they're a drug addict and, they're going through withdrawal after 2023 because of their, pretty abysmal box office performances. So, they really want to funnel these resources back to the more profitable theatrical model. And again, it just feels desperate, right? Again, you can make a sequel, but again, I feel like, and along with making a live action remake, and it's like the film is it's not even a decade old, and you're talking about making a live action remake and now a animated sequel, and it just feels very much like, hey, remember this really successful movie? Oh, don't worry, potential activist investors, we're gonna make it again. We're gonna try to do it again. So that's another announcement. Another huge announcement that I think is the most interesting, though we don't have a lot of details about it, is this partnership with Epic Games. So Epic Games, if you don't know, is a video game publisher. They create Unreal Engine, which is like a huge, tool that video game developers will use for so many different games in the industry. And they also, are the people behind Fortnite. So obviously a really big deal in the gaming sphere. And Disney, they announced that they're going to be investing $1.5 billion with a B billion dollars into Epic Games. And we have a quote here from Bob Iger saying, quote, "This is their biggest foray into the game space ever." And then he goes on to say, quote, "We've entered into a strategic relationship with Epic Games, the maker of Fortnite, to not only invest in the company, but we're also creating a huge Disney universe," end quote. Spoiler alert, there's not a lot of details about what that Disney universe is going to be. I had a really hard time trying to figure out, like, what even is this? Like, Disney's already, I believe, part of Fortnite in a lot of ways. But it seems like they're talking about, in addition to that, they want to build something new together. We also have a press release from Disney, which followed up stating, quote, "In addition to being a world-class games experience and interoperating with Fortnite, the new persistent universe," that's like the thing, I guess, but I'm not sure what this really is, though. "The new persistent universe will offer a multitude of opportunities for consumers to play, watch, shop, and engage with content, characters, and stories from Disney, Pixar, Marvel, Star Wars, Avatar, etc. Players, gamers, and fans will be able to create their own stories and experiences, express their fandom in a distinctly Disney way," annoyingly, "and share content with each other in ways that they love," end quote. So that's like a lot of corporate speak. So again, I'm not quite sure what this is gonna be. It's also funny in this announcement, Iger was like, "Yeah, I some guy, when I came back to Disney, for my second tenure as CEO, I sat down with, we looked at the data, and gaming is huge with the Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and gaming's the future." And I want to be like, where have you been? It has been a huge industry, or huge sector of the entertainment industry for, I would say, at least a decade, if not maybe 15 years, really going back to like that mid-2000s when you get something like Halo 3 and Call of Duty Modern Warfare and Grand Theft Auto. These games that were huge cultural phenomenons beyond just people who like games, right? In terms of, again, what this is actually going to be, THR seems to suggest that it's almost going to be like a social network, like finally kind of capitalizing and doing some kind of like metaverse thing. Not necessarily VR, but just metaverse in the sense of this, digital space that exists more than just like for game mechanics, right? Epic Games has been vocal about wanting to create like a true metaverse, though in some ways Fortnite already is. And it seems like, Verge notes that it might be kind of similar to Lego Fortnite, which recently just released, and that's it shares the Fortnite name, but really is not, it's a push away from the Battle Royale style that Fortnite, is famous for. But has been kind of waning, I think, in terms of popularity. It's still very, very popular, but I feel like it's popular because people can't find anything else that scratches the same itch. So again, I guess it's like some kind of like virtual world. Again, this announcement is overall fairly vague. Like, is this going to be like Disney Infinity, which was like a Toys to Life game, which I thought was really cool. It's like this crossover between all these different Disney-owned properties and stuff, and I never played it, because again, you need to buy physical figurines in order to like play certain characters, and so I don't know.
And again, I don't even know if they really know. I think this is maybe like a half-baked idea that, again, that Iger was just like, let's just get this out there. We just need we need good press, and we need to show that we're making bold moves, right? Another big announcement here is that the Eras Tour, Taylor Swift's concert film, will finally find its streaming home on Disney Plus. I believe on March 15th, Disney Plus will be its exclusive streaming home for Taylor Swift, the Eras Tour, and then parentheses Taylor's version, playing off of her albums that she re-released and re-recorded. And reportedly, Disney Plus paid more than $75 million for the rights, which on one hand is ludicrous, but at the same time, it's Taylor Swift, and like we talked about last week, she just won Best Album of the Year at the Grammy. She's like the biggest star on the planet. And, like the Super Bowl was just last night, and I feel like she was as much of a focus as the game itself. So maybe $75 million is actually a steal. So that time will tell on that. But, this will be an extended version of the concert film. There's already been an extended version that's been available for months. But this will be streaming, right, as opposed to VOD to rent or buy. And that was extended. This is like extended. This is going to have even more content. Deadline also notes that, this is far from the beginning of a relationship between Swift and Disney, right? This is a continued partnership. That's where she did her, I guess, kind of like a concert-esque film, Folklore, the Long Pond Studio Sessions, where she basically went through all of her songs from Folklore, but just kind of like in a studio setting. And also, Searchlight Pictures, which is under Disney, is set to distribute Swift's directorial debut. I have no idea what that film's going to be or what it's about, but clearly there's some kind of relationship here. So this makes sense that this is where her concert film would end up in terms of streaming. And then one final kind of announcement here is that there's the intention to invest about $60 billion with a base, $60 billion into parks expansion, right? And kind of really bolstering that brand. They really need to, going forward, they really need to be competitive with Universal, which just announced plans for a whole other section to their park. And I believe that this $60 billion investment, about 70% of it is going to go towards increasing capacity, right? Which has just become, my fiance and I just went to Disney about 6 months ago, and it was supposed to be one of the downtimes of the year, and it was still pretty packed. So clearly they want to try to make more room, not necessarily to make the experience better for the people who are there, but just to make it bigger so that, okay, it's packed at this amount, so let's make it bigger so we can pack it at that amount, right? But in any case, so all of these announcements to say, Iger also made clear, he's trying to assure investors that a succession plan is a huge priority, because obviously that didn't go so well the first time. And ultimately the Wrap actually notes that after all these announcements in their quarterly earnings report, shares actually jumped about 10% after this news. And Bob Iger said, quote, "Our strong performance this past quarter demonstrates we have turned the corner, entered a new era for our company," end quote. See, all right, Iger is really trying to sell this as, like, I know last year wasn't particularly great, but we have a lot of interesting stuff on the horizon. Please don't sell your shares, right? Now, like we said, Nelson Peltz had outlined these demands or areas of reform. Have they been met? Right? So a statement from Treon said, quote, "It's deja vu all over again. We saw this movie last year and we didn't like the ending," end quote. But I don't know. I feel like maybe not satisfactorily, but it seems like this 1 week has kind of answered all 5 of those things. So corporate governance, Iger at least has indicated that they're really taking succession plans seriously. Streaming profitability, that seems to be something that they're working towards for this fiscal year. Creative output, all those different projects that I mentioned. Growth in parks, they're investing about $60 billion in the park. And the future of ESPN, and they, in addition to the standalone app, they're creating this joint venture with Fox Corp and Warner Brothers Discovery. So, again, only time will tell. I'm sure Nelson Peltz is not going to be satisfied, with as he clearly made it very clear. But only time will tell. Okay, so story number 2 here. This is a really
annoying one. And I'll try to make the rest of our stories this evening a little bit shorter. I know I went a little bit long with that last one, but Warner Brothers Discovery supposedly plans to just permanently delete their film Coyote versus Acme. Now, if you don't know what this movie is, so this was a film that Warner Brothers Discovery was developing. It's based off of like a New Yorker article from the 90s. It's basically this idea that the Coyote from the Looney Tunes is suing Acme for all their like shitty products that he's always using, and for comedic effect they never quite work, or they don't work the way that he thinks they're going to work, and it's this whole thing, right? And it seemed kind of like a Roger Rabbit-esque kind of, interaction between the real world and the animated world. I can't speak to how good it would be, and I may never be able to, because so in November, Warner Brothers announced that they were shelving the film entirely for a tax break. And everybody dogpiled on Warner Brothers. Like, how can you do this? This is so disrespectful to the filmmakers, people who made it. And it's like you have a full film that is just never going to be seen. It got slammed by everybody. And ultimately, Warner Brothers kind of walked back the decision and gave the filmmakers the chance to shop the film around to potential different distributors. I believe the film was originally going to be a Max original, and then they decided to release it theatrically, and then they decided we can't even release this. But some people now have speculated that maybe they really weren't ever going to let the filmmakers give it to someone else, and that they were just trying to buy time. Deadline notes that Warner Brothers received offers for this film of around anywhere from $30 to $50 million. Potential suitors, if you will, included like Netflix and Amazon Prime and Paramount even. And there's some gossip, according to Deadline, that South by Southwest even expressed interest in programming it into their festival, but Warner Brothers wouldn't screen it. So what gives? There's people who wanted to get it, who wanted to take it off of Warner Brothers' hands. So what the hell happened? So Warner Brothers apparently wanted $75 to $80 million. Now, for context, if they go the tax break route, they'll get about $35 to $40 million, right? So basically, they wanted to double what they would get from the tax break. They wanted essentially what's called negative cost plus. So essentially, the cost of the movie, the cost of what it took to make the movie plus more, right? So make a little profit off of it, right? And according to the Wrap, they refused to entertain any counteroffers. So there was no moment of negotiation. They basically, would receive some offers, but they would just be like, here's what we want, take it or leave it. And, the Wrap also notes that Warner Brothers may be using the end of their financial quarter as an excuse to just settle the whole situation. Again, to help potentially the stock price. And it's because they don't want to show that they were unable to find a buyer, right? So they would rather just unceremoniously literally delete the film entirely, so that it basically doesn't exist. And supposedly, according to the Wrap, David Zaslav, who's the CEO of this new Warner Brothers Discovery merger, I guess it's not really new at this point, but Zaslav and the other executives at Warner Brothers haven't even seen the finished film, and supposedly Zaslav has never even seen any version of the film. So again, it just continues David Zaslav being a fucking horrible media executive. He might be, only time will tell if he is a good media executive in the sense of helping turn the financial situation of the company around. But it's like, if you're a filmmaker, I don't know why you would want to ever go work with Warner Brothers, because your film could just get, completely shelved or permanently deleted. And again, still unclear why this film was even shelved to begin with, right? So there's a precedent for this. Notably, they were making a Batgirl film and that was canceled. But supposedly that was because it got awful test scores with test audiences, right? And supposedly, by contrast, according to the Wrap, this film did very well with test audiences. So again, it seems like it just wouldn't make the amount that they wanted it to make, so it wasn't even worth releasing, right? And there's also an element to this that this was greenlit by a previous regime at Warner Brothers before Zaslav took over, according to the AV Club. So there is that element of, wanting to just do your own thing as an executive, and then you have all this stuff you didn't even greenlight or you had no interest in, and it's causing these issues. You just want to get rid of it. But this really is just an awful situation, because again, films are more than just products. They are, even a shitty one, it's an artistic expression. And that's not even to mention film preservation, right? Like, again, this whole film with Will Forte and John Cena, like, this wasn't some weird avant-garde underground thing. This was was going to be like a big-ish movie, right? And ultimately, my stance on the whole thing is that, like, fine, if you want a tax write-off, you have a tax write-off. But if you're getting a tax write-off, that's our tax money. Or rather, I guess, because they're not getting money, but that's tax money that we as a society are not getting. So I think if you want to write off a multi-million-dollar movie as a tax write-off, okay, fine. But it should become public domain at that point. At that point, it belongs to us, the people. And obviously that's not going to happen unless there's some kind of, culture change and the actual legislation is passed. But, it's just a really sad development, and hopefully they figure this out. So the film, at least, even if it doesn't get shown for years and years, at least it doesn't get permanently deleted. Okay, let's talk about story number 3 here. Actually, let me get a little bit of water. Hope you're enjoying the show. Let's talk about story number 3. So, pretty interesting news here. So, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, they are the organization that coordinates and runs the Academy Awards, the Oscars. And they have announced that they are establishing a new award to honor achievement in casting. This will go into effect for the 98th Academy Awards in 2026, which will honor the films from 2025. And this is the first new category since 2001 with Best Animated Feature. Now, in terms of some other changes since then, there hasn't been a new award, but they combined sound mixing and editing in 2020, which I think, I'm not a sound person, so maybe this would be sacrilegious to say, but it's like, they're really not, there obviously are differences, but really they should just be one category. And so that I actually kind of agree with that decision. But then a decision I did not agree with, and no one did, was in 2018 they announced that they were going to introduce a popular film category, because they were like, well, we never nominate all these big popular movies, so instead of trying to kind of change the way we think about what deserves Best Picture, let's just create a whole category, like popular film category. And it was scrapped because it's so stupid. And it's like, well, what counts as a popular film? How do you measure that? So that ended up getting cut. But, the inclusion of an award like this for casting directors, it's been a long build-up. The effort, Variety notes that this, this effort dates back all the way to the 1990s. There was a really popular documentary, I think in 2012, called Casting By, that kind of shed a light on the work that casting directors do. So in 2013, IndieWire notes that, the Academy created the casting directors branch, and it currently has like nearly 160 members. And Deadline also notes that the Emmys has had a category like this for quite some time. So, it makes sense, and I'm all for it. There has been some resistance to it. Deadline notes that some directors feel that directors are very heavily involved in such decisions. So it's like sometimes an award might go to the casting director, but in a lot of ways, the director was as involved, if not more involved with the casting than the casting director. But then Vanity Fair makes a really good point. They quote a casting director here, Gene McCarthy, who pushes back on this idea, saying, quote, "I've heard the arguments against a casting Oscar, but it doesn't really make sense to me that you would say, well, a casting director doesn't really choose the actors, the director does." End quote. As a costume designer would bring a series of sketches to a director, it's a collaboration that is dependent on the casting director's instincts. It's a very crucial part of filmmaking. End quote. And I kind of agreed with the directors, and then I read that quote, and I'm kind of with the casting directors here, where, even if the director's involved, ideally the director's involved in every aspect of the film, right? And having been a director a few times, very grateful for it, but, as a director, you're supposed to really collaborate closely with every one of your department heads. Even if you don't know anything about costumes, you're there to really provide the vision, and then that costume designer or the casting director is there to execute your vision using their skills, right? So I think this is a really good step for the Oscars. And also we have this statement here from CEO Bill Kramer, and Academy President Janet Yang, quote, "Casting directors play an essential role in filmmaking, and as the Academy evolves, we are proud to add casting to the disciplines that we recognize and celebrate," end quote. And yeah, I don't find this super controversial. I think this is a really good idea. Again, honoring that work. Because sometimes you watch a film and it's just, the casting is just so superb and so perfect. I feel like this could devolve into just like the way a lot of awards of the Academy are, not always for the best of something, but the most of something. So it's like the best, it's not always the best actor. It's like the most actor, like whoever's doing the most histrionic performance, or like costumes where it's like, it's not always the best costumes, it's just the most costumes, right? And it's like the most obvious. So I could see this devolving into like a film with a large cast is, and that's not necessarily what always casting is. I think sometimes it's really important, even if it's a really small cast, because it's about finding that chemistry between the actors. So, this is still a developing kind of award. The Academy says that they'll kind of outline more detailed rules April of next year in 2025. But again, it opens, hopefully there's not another 20 plus years in between them creating another award, right? I think there have been other things that, potential categories that still have yet to be created. I think best voice acting would be a really great addition, since we already have different categories for live action versus animation. Why don't we have a category for best voice acting? And it doesn't even need to be gendered or supporting, just best voice acting. And you could also include like voiceover of documentaries, right? And then the big one that people always talk about is best stunt work, which doesn't even have a branch at all in the Academy. So I think that would be a really great addition to recognize those people. And again, sometimes the arguments against that are like, well, not a lot of films use stunts. It's like, yeah, but not a lot of films have special effects and VFX either, but we still have a category for that. So I think, again, this is pretty uncontroversial in my opinion. And I think just the more opportunities to honor people, the better. Okay, so story number 4. Actually, let me get a little drink here. So story number 4, YouTube CEO Neil Mohan, has published his annual letter. And according to THR, Mohan believes YouTube's next frontier is, quote, building out the living room viewing experience and turning subscriptions into a meaningful business. So it seems like Mohan and YouTube are really outlining their vision for 2024 and how to keep expanding the business. And Mohan unveiled essentially what he called 4 big bets. So what are these 4 big bets? So bet number 1 is the living room. It's notable that about 1 billion with a B billion hours are spent on TV sets every day watching YouTube in some capacity. And in addition to that, YouTube TV, which we actually mentioned earlier in our segment about Disney, YouTube TV is like digital way to watch linear television, right? And the YouTube TV has about 8 million subscribers, which is up from 5 million in 2022. So YouTube is really becoming a huge player in the space. Like YouTube TV is not new by any means, but it shows an increased interest in linear TV as traditional cable dies very slowly, right? And I think YouTube is really moving in that space. And could really become a huge player if these trends continue, right? So that's one big bet, is really leaning into that people watch YouTube. A huge portion of them are watching YouTube on their couch, right? In their living room, on their TV, as opposed to their phone or their laptop, which is probably more, but it's 1 billion hours. That's a lot, right? And that's a lot of potential eyeballs for advertising revenue and creator subscriptions and things like that. So That seems to be, as he laid out, one of the big bets. So what's another big bet? So we also have the creator ecosystem, right? Continuing to develop new business models for creators. And Mahan, whether he's being sincere or just trying to kind of play, to people's own sensibilities, but he says that he feels that these creators on the platform, because they really make YouTube what it is, right? He feels that they should be, quote, recognized as next generation studios, end quote. And that they're the really, this really goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. They drive the business. They are the reason why YouTube is successful. You need the content, right? And YouTube has always been good about rewarding its creators. Obviously, there's still strides that should be made and could be made. But YouTube probably has, of all of similar sites, YouTube has always been fairly fair in terms of sharing ad revenue. So we also have here, Variety notes that the YouTube Partner Program has paid out, quote, over $70 billion to creators, artists, and media companies over the last 3 years, end quote. And again, Variety notes that more than 3 million channels now receive ad revenue share. So again, it's a really great place to build an audience. Case in point, which we're still growing, but it is a great place to try to not only build an audience just for its own artistic and personal fulfillment sake, but also potentially to create a revenue stream, right? So another big bet that Mahan lays out are AI features, as another tool in a creator's toolkit, saying, quote, we'll continue to ensure AI is in service of creativity through our work with creative industries in the rollout of AI-powered features and as we unlock opportunities while building out appropriate protections, end quote. And that kind of goes into the fourth big bet is AI disclaimers, right, and protection. So, he talks about, in the future, having labels or banners for content that is, quote, synthetically generated, end quote, which is such a weird euphemism, thing for AI generated content, synthetically generated. But that seems to be a priority of making sure that people at least know when something has been created by an artificial intelligence system. Overall, my analysis here is that, YouTube really should worry the traditional media companies, right? I've always felt that, Netflix isn't competing with Disney Plus. Netflix is competing with YouTube and with TikTok and these other spheres of media consumption, right? Because again, YouTube is a real competitor. Because again, it has that really high quality, not always high quality, but like you can find some really high quality user generated content on YouTube, right? Whether it's music videos or video essays or things like that. Like people put a lot of work into their YouTube content and it shows, right? So you have that side of it, but then also when it comes to more quote unquote professional content, again, at YouTube with YouTube TV has this, provides this frictionless access, not only to live TV, but then also I believe to rent and buy movies. So again, kind of like I talked about, I believe last week with Amazon, that YouTube could be like a one-stop shop where it's like you go on YouTube and that's how you access Disney Plus or something like that, right? Where it could become a true hub for users who yearn for, again, the simplicity, for better or for worse, the simplicity of the cable era, right? Mahan even says, quote, viewers want everything in one place, from a live sports game to the BBC to Khan Academy and Nikki tutorials. And they're watching YouTube the way we used to sit down together for traditional TV shows on the biggest screen in the home with friends and family, end quote. And like I said, I feel like it's the best middle ground between TikTok and traditional media because you do have that user-generated flair and energy, but it's a little bit, YouTube videos tend to be a little bit longer, can be a little bit more in-depth, whereas TikTok, you do have some more involved content, but it really is driven by shorter bursts of content. Okay, just hold on 1 second. I'm just looking for OBS. This is only our second stream, so I'm still getting used to this. Okay, and last story I want to cover, we have Jonathan Majors here, who his sentencing hearing has been postponed. So originally it was supposed to be earlier last week. Now it's going to be in April. If you haven't been following this, he's facing about a year in prison after a guilty verdict in December found him guilty on 1 count of assault and 1 count of harassment. I won't get into all the details because you probably already know about it. And also,
it's something I just don't really want to get into in this capacity right now. But ultimately, the defense is desperately trying to keep Majors out of prison, right? They're arguing that the initial trial, featured 2 different inconsistent assault counts. And they also argued that prosecution provided insufficient evidence, right? And it's very possible that he serves 0 jail time, as Rolling Stone notes. There was a chance, because this was his first true crime, in a sense, though not quite, as we'll talk about. Some legal experts thought that he might be able to, get out of any prison time with probation and community service. But then he had this Good Morning America interview where he essentially denied any wrongdoing, right? And as THR notes, that could really hurt his chances. And we have a quote here from Nathan Miller, who's the founder of the crisis management firm Miller Inc. He says, quote, "That interview tremendously undercut his credibility. There's ways of denying you committed physical assault, but also acknowledging the complexities of the situation that shows responsibility. The public doesn't like it when they think someone is being evasive and makes themselves a victim," end quote. I think that's really spot on, right? Like, it would have been better if he was just kind of receded into the shadows, in a sense. And I don't know what his PR team was thinking getting him this interview, maybe hoping to try to clean up his image, but I think it at best did nothing, and at worst maybe hurt his image. And then a couple days later, after the sentencing was postponed, it's come to light that there's a longer history of abuse, which had kind of been hinted at. Major's defense team had tried to keep this information from going public because this was part of the trial. There were 2 women who have come forward. You have former girlfriend Emma Duncan, who accuses him of physically and emotionally abusing her, and then Mara Hooper, accusing him of emotional abuse. And notably, both women dated Majors before his meteoric rise to fame in the beginning of last year. And in addition to these more interpersonal relationships, New York Times reports that there was a history of volatility on the set of Lovecraft Country, which was a show that he starred in. Specifically having confrontations with female coworkers who would then report that behavior. So the reason why I'm talking about this is because, again, this is like such a strange career trajectory for this guy who is, one of the biggest up-and-coming stars, and he just blew it. And it's not a shame in the sense like, oh, this poor guy, because I don't want to make a huge judgment call, but he seems like a not great guy, right? And I think Disney was absolutely right to remove him as Kang from the MCU. It's just now, I don't think there was any hope for his career coming back, but I think with the guilty verdict and this new information coming to light, I think he'll be lucky to ever work again as an actor in anything major, no pun intended, ever again. Okay, so let's just start wrapping up the show here. So in terms of upcoming releases, we have Madam Web, which it seems like it's going to be a dumpster fire. This is part of the Sony Spider-Man universe of villain. I don't even know what it's called, but basically Sony is trying to make their version of the MCU with the Spider-Man villains that they have access to contractually. So it's all these Spider-Man villain movies with no Spider-Man. And I've never understood why they thought that would ever work. This is following Morbius, which was a huge disaster critically and commercially. The marketing for this has been pretty subpar. The trailers seem pretty awful. It's tracking to make about $15 to $24 million in its opening weekend. It's premiering actually on Wednesday, on Valentine's Day, so it's even going to have a little bit of a lead up. But I'm not super hopeful about the quality of this movie. And then we also got the Bob Marley biopic, Bob Marley One Love, tracking at about 16 to 21 million. Again, also coming out on Valentine's Day. Not a super romantic movie though, so I'm not sure. Well, maybe it will be. I haven't seen it, but it doesn't scream romance to me the way that Madam Web isn't necessarily romantic either, but it's a girl, it's a female-led story, so you might have some Galentine's Day crowds, perhaps. But Bob Marley, One Love, 16 to 21 million. Not sure, again, it kind of just from the trailer seems like a pretty generic biopic, so people might be really drawn to it and this actor's rendition of Bob Marley, but again, that remains to be seen. And one of the last things we do on the show is I just want to give a shout out to the best film I watched this week. This is an honor I give to a movie, whether I've seen it for the first time this week or for the millionth time. Just whatever was the best thing I saw. And this week would be The Batman, the Robert Pattinson Batman movie from 2022. I watched it for a podcast that I do with my fiance, which I'll plug a little bit later. It's the link in the description. And it's just so great. It's, it really is such a great reinvention of Batman, while also staying true to what really makes the character unique and interesting. And I am just so excited for the sequel, to even just get a little crumb, just a little taste of what they're going to do in the sequel. Because right now we don't really know much at all. All right, so I want to thank you all for watching the stream. I want to give a couple plugs. I have actually another YouTube channel called Peter Squared, where I kind of take a more in-depth look at topics related to film and media and entertainment in a more written video essay form. The current video we have up is a closer look at Frozen, where we talk about the Disney film Frozen and look at what went right, what went wrong, and everything in between, including these animated versions of a modern day and younger version of myself. And then we also have the podcast that I mentioned. Now, that's what I call a franchise, where me and my fiance Viviana, each season we pick a film franchise, and each episode we go through every single installment of that franchise. The good, the bad, and the ugly. We're currently doing Batman, like I said. Our most recent episode on the Lego Batman movie is up. You should definitely check it out. Again, link is in the description. And then lastly, like I mentioned before, so Cinema Cuso is not just a YouTube channel. It originally started, and it still is, a Substack newsletter where I publish reviews of new releases and kind of give you my thoughts on those. So if you if you'd like, I definitely recommend checking out the newsletter. If you could subscribe, that would be great. You can check out my reviews. It's at cinemancuso.substack.com. That's it for this week. I'll catch you all next Monday, 6 p.m. Eastern Time for more notes on the news. Take care. Bye-bye.